Our next type of graph would be dot plots. Dot plots sometimes are obviously shown with dots and sometimes they're shown with X's, but either way it's called a dot plot. And how you read these is you just look at the axis down here, and it'll tell you your unit. Sometimes it says it over here, sometimes it'll say it underneath, but you can find that. So these are the number of inches, and our title obviously says daily snowfall amounts. So this is how many days it snowed 1 inch, how many days it snowed 2 inches, how many days it didn't snow at all. So that's how you read this dot plot. So for example, the question might say, how many, or like, what amount of inches had the most daily snowfalls? And obviously you would just be looking for which number had the most number of dots. Or they might say, what's the least, how many inches has the least number of days? And obviously that would be the 5 inches. 5 inches only has one day that it actually snowed 5 inches. And then you might ask you something like, what's the least amount of snow that fell? And obviously that would be 0 because there was 2 days that it didn't snow at all. So that's how you read this. You can definitely use dot plots to find the median. Once again, just like we did with histogram, you could list out these numbers. So like you could put them in a list. So you'd have like 0, 0, and then you'd have several ones listed, some 2s, some 3s, and you'd list them all out and you would find the median just like you would before, cross them off till you get to the middle. Same thing, you could find mean. You add all these up, so 0 plus 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and then you divide how many days you have. Which, saying that, another question they might ask is, how many total days was this? So you would just have to count up all your dots. And yes, you include the zeros because that's included in your stats. Let's look at another one. So this is class sizes. So the number of students in each class. So obviously the one question they might say is, what's the most number of students in a class? And you would say 30 because there's 3 classes that have 30 kids. The question might be, what's the most common class size? You would say 29 because that's the one that has the most number of dots. Then they might say, what's the smallest class size? And you would say 25 because there's one class that has 25 students in it. Okay? Another example, minutes to eat breakfast. So this one's kind of spread out, but that's okay. You still have a lot of data to look at. They might say, what's the most common number of minutes to eat breakfast? And that would be 3 because 3 has the most number of dots. They might say, what's the maximum amount of time to eat breakfast? That would be 9 because that's the most that people have to eat breakfast. So that's pretty much how you read a dot plot. It's not super tricky. Once again, you can find median and mean with it. If we were to list these out, we could do this one real quick because I think it's got the smallest number of dots. So like you would literally list them out. Don't skip anything. All right, and the reason I put 2 27s is because I have 2 dots listed here. So there's 2 of those. I'm going to write out 4 28s. I'm going to have 5 29s. And then I have 3 30s. All right, so if I wanted to find the mean, remember the average, you add all these up, and then you divide by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Divide by 16, that's going to give you your average class size. All right, if I want to find the median, now that everything's listed, I just start going from start to finish. And that's what, so I'll get down to 28 and 29. Remember, if you're stuck with 2, you add them together, divide by 2, and that's going to come out to be 28.5. So my median is 28.5. So you can still find mean and median even with a dot plot. So please don't forget that. A couple other things I want to draw your attention to. We have some vocabulary words. So the first one I want to talk about is peak. So peak is when you are finding the one with the tallest, the most number of dots. So it sounds, kind of like a mountain. So like here's your peak. So 1 is your peak. All right. In this one, where's your peak? Your peak is here. 29 is your peak. All right. And then in this one, 3 is my peak. So peak is kind of like the mountain, you know what I mean? The top of the mountain, the one that where the tallest amount is. Sometimes you might have a tie. For example, in this one right here, if this one didn't have a dot right here, then you'd have several peaks because several places have the highest amount. Another word we have is the word cluster. Okay? Cluster is where you have a large amount of the dots located. So for example, looking at this one right here, most of my dots are right here. All right, that's where my cluster is. That's where most of my dots are. For this one, here's my cluster. Okay, and it's not like a set number of dots. It's just where are most of your dots located. Most of my dots are located over here because I've only got 4 over here. So here's where most of my dots are. Same thing for this one. Most of my dots are on this side of the graph. Okay, there's only a few over here. Most of them are over here. So this is my cluster. Okay, and then the last word I want to talk about is the word gap. So there's no gap in this graph. There's no gap in this graph, but there is a gap in this graph. So here's your gap. So a gap is just where you have a space where nothing's located. Okay? Like obviously, not every graph is going to have a gap. Not every graph is going to have a cluster. And like I said, some graphs might not have a peak because there might be multiple numbers with the same amount of dots. Okay? So those are just some quick little new vocabulary words that seem to make sense to me. They're pretty common sense. But we're going to see these again, so just make sure you try to remember what these words mean, okay? We're going to keep practicing with dot plots, and if you have any questions, just let me know.